it should be a fun conversation today. We're going to be talking about new leadership. So not only what to do and what to coach new leaders about, but also the conversation really that we've been having for, well, the last year or two since the pandemic, which is that leadership is changing. And so it's not only probably relevant to people who are new at being leaders, but it's also hopefully relevant to people who are experiencing a change in what leadership means. And it's going to be, I think, a fascinating and passionate conversation with our guest today, Baruti Kafele, or Principal Kafele, as he's also known. We're going to bring Baruti in a couple of minutes, but what we do in these conversations is I'll give you a little bit of a context so you understand what we're talking about and why. I'm not going to give you a quick review of Zoom and how to make the screens larger or smaller. I think we're all PhD level experts in Zoom currently. And if not, then I'm sure you can find someone to help you pretty quickly. So, new leadership. Baruti has published a dozen or more books. He's had at least 7 bestsellers from ASCD. This one came out in 2018, just prior to the pandemic. And the title really speaks for itself. Is my school a better school because I lead it? And it really looks at the influence and the impact of the leader in their school. One thing that we've been talking about for the last year or so is that leadership has really had a change since the pandemic. There were so many times when people in positions of power almost passed the buck of decision-making down and down and down another level, whether it was from the federal politicians to the state and local politicians or people at the district level. Very often, some of these decisions about what to do, whether to keep schools open, how to feed the students, how to keep people safe, landed at the footstep of the school leaders, the principals. And so they were put in this very unenviable position of having to make what was not the right choice, but what was the least harmful choice very often. And I could have picked any of Baruti's books really to start this conversation because he is an expert in leadership. But this one really spoke to me because it puts the emphasis back onto that individual who does have so much influence in schools. And we'll run through a couple of highlights of the book as well and understand why I sort of chose this book. And Baruti began this book in the prologue by talking about having the person be introspective and reflective and start to think about, as you as the leader of the school, have you gone back to really understand what your role is, what your influence is? And a little bit deeper than that, are you actually following through on the things that you claim you are about? Have you ever stepped outside yourself to scrutinize your own leadership with a critical eye? And if so, did you like what you see? Did you like what you saw? And these are some fundamental questions that we don't often ask ourselves as leaders. We very often ask ourselves, are we checking the box? Do we have our sessions scheduled? Is our accountability metrics up to speed? Is the budget effective? Is the bus timetabling working? Are some of those managerial tasks that we're asked all the time, are they functioning well? And we too often, at least in my humble opinion, we equate management of duties and tasks with effective leadership. But very few people go into education or leadership in education because of the love of the budget or the scheduling or the benchmarks. They typically go into education and to educational leadership because they see the value of what they're doing. They're probably aiming for some ideals which are a little bit higher, a little bit more meaningful to them, their school, and their students. And then Baruti goes on to ask a series of other questions about, did you feel that what you were observing was the best possible version of yourself? And were there parts that you were dissatisfied with? Is there room for improvement, immediate attention? And so this idea about being self-reflective just comes through time and time again in the work. Baruti coined the phrase, the attitude gap, where the attitude of the principal, of the leader, is just crucial. It implies the culture. It influences the climate of that school. He then goes on to ask, we won't go through all of them, but a series of questions in this book. The first one, who am I as the leader of my school? Great leaders have an identity. When you're around great leaders, you can feel that influence. You can feel that power that they have and that confidence that they have as well. You can sense that leadership. And you might have that understanding or that belief, but, do the rest of the people in your school believe that or feel that? Do your actions equate to your vision? Does your vision equate to your mission? And it's just really a time to tie back who you are as a leader back to what you want to be as a leader. Now, he also goes on in the book, and I would recommend, if you haven't read it, to grab a copy. But he goes on to also weigh up I suppose they're excuses, or sometimes they're reasons why some leaders find it difficult to actually impart their mission. And it might be because of the local context, the surroundings, the noise that we all experience as leaders that can impact our decisions. But he then goes on to explain that the really great leaders keep their integrity and keep their intention regardless of the outside distractions. Not always easy, but certainly crucial and critical if we really want to be effective leaders that are more than just checking the box. In a way, he's really talking about self-reflection, being humble, looking at yourself, being vulnerable, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and being honest. And when we consider the noise that we're sort of hearing at the moment in education, it's really been an amazing pendulum swing back from teachers being the blessing of society to now, in some parts of the country, people coming out and opposing educators, book bans, what they can teach, what they can talk about. You've had the noise of the Great Resignation, changing world, mental health of not only students, but of teachers and leaders, equity, AI, the ongoing culture wars, staffing issues, and also, as we were talking about early, that constantly changing role of the principal. But what I picked up, at least from Baruti's many talks that he gives, but also his writings, is that we actually need to probably focus more on self-reflection, being humble, being uncomfortable, getting more vulnerable with ourselves if we want to outweigh some of those distractions. But enough of my talking. I'm going to introduce the man himself, Baruti Kafele. So Baruti, if you want to unmute yourself and open up your camera. I see you're there in a very dapper. You're not wearing your baseball outfit today.
No, that's only
Very dapper black shirt.
it's only for Saturdays.
Only for the special occasions. Yeah, you can read through Baruti's bio there. It's an impressive bio. He's been probably one of the most best-selling authors from ASCD, where I worked for a while. At least 7 bestsellers. What's the last one you have released, Baruti?
Yeah, the assistant principal identity, protecting your leadership mindset, fervor, and authenticity.
Oh, wonderful. When was that released? Just this
That was
year?
released in May of this year, so it's still pretty much brand new.
All right, fantastic. And I wanted to mention as well, we actually have a lot of Canadians who signed up for this, and you are going to be keynoting, I believe, the ULEAD conference in Canada and the Canadian Association of Principals conference, both in April, I believe. So
Yeah.
okay, fantastic.
There, I'll be in Nova Scotia actually soon. So I make a lot of trips back and forth to Canada.
All right, wonderful. Well, I may see you at the ULEAD in Banff. It's a tough place to go visit, Banff in the springtime. I was being sarcastic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's an absolutely gorgeous place. Anyway, welcome, Baruti. Let's get into it. What we're going to do is we're going to have a chat for about half an hour, and then if there are questions from the audience, you can enter those into the Q&A, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end to get to the audience questions as well. So we started this introduction with that question that you were asking as well, and you were talking about how you came to this realization after talking with lots of school leaders, and you were a bit astounded that many of them haven't had that self-reflection. So maybe you can elaborate on why you began the book with those questions, and why did self-reflection become such a key part of the work that you do?
Yeah, well, let me go back even further. And good morning to everybody that's on live this morning, and good day to everyone who will see the recording later. Going back to my principal years, my last school as a principal, I led 4 different schools over 14 years. And my last school, we had a photographer there, so I was doing a principals meeting. I call them my state of the school meetings, and those are led by me. And it's just to give the school a feeling of where we are right now in terms of where we're going. And my photographer, or our photographer, took a picture of me from behind. So it caught my back and the back of my head, and then the faces of the students. And somewhere around the same time, I had won the Milken Award, and they came in and did a profile, followed me with the camera for 2 days to be able to sum up my work in this 4-minute video, which they did a marvelous job of capturing my leadership within 4 minutes. But there's this one scene where it has, once again, me from behind. I'm putting a picture of a student on my office door, because anytime I got a photograph of them, I would post them on my office door. So it caught me from behind. And in looking at the video, and in looking at the picture, the photograph of me speaking to my students, it put me in a situation where I'm seeing myself in a way that I've never seen myself before. I mean, you see a picture, you see the front of you, but I'd never seen pictures or footage of me from behind. And it was this outer, if I can, I hope I make sense of this. It was this outer body experience for me in both situations. And it led me to asking the question, who is that guy as a leader? Now, of course, I knew who he was. It was me. But it allowed me to see me in a different light, through a different lens, if you will. And I started going deep with it, and deep with it, and deep with it. Like, is that guy that I see, meaning myself, is he who I perceive him or me to be? And I had to ask some very honest questions. And I'm looking particularly the picture, the picture where I can see my students. So I see them looking at me, but I don't see me looking at them. I see the back of me facing them. And I started asking myself questions such as, how am I being perceived? Is the way that I see myself as their leader, their principal, the way that they perceive me as their leader or principal? Are there things I need to be doing different? Is the way I lead adequate for the students that I lead and the staff that I lead, and so on? So I'm asking all these questions, and it stayed with me. And ultimately, it led to me asking the question, is my school a better school because I lead it? And I've been grappling with that question, even in my retirement from it. I'm not retirement age, but I retired. I took an early retirement because I had a big dream, big goal back when I was in my 20s of being a national and international speaker. So I retired early so that I could live that goal. So getting back to it, that question, is my school a better school because I lead it? It's a question that I would literally ask myself every day, every single day, right at the end of the school day. And it was rooted in my non-negotiables as a leader, instructional leadership and student engagement. Those were my two non-negotiables as related to my leadership. So the answers would therefore vary. See, if the answer was yes every day, then I don't need to ask myself that question. But if the answer varies, yes, sort of, maybe, no, not the best day, all those kinds of answers, then it forced me to ask the question every day, because as I got an answer based on my two non-negotiables, then I would have to go back to my office and figure out why I couldn't be the leader that I wanted to be. So always using the mirror, which I keep handy, using the mirror, self-reflecting, self-assessing towards self-adjustment and self-improvement, and always striving for self-actualization, but being here. So just being self-reflective and asking the question, is my school a better school because I lead it? But also, who is that leading my school? It mattered.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the idea of even the start of that, about understanding the perception that you're giving off. It's like I worked for a number of years in resilience and youth development world, and we would ask the students, how do you know if someone, a leader cares about you or a teacher cares about you? And it wasn't actually whether they cared about that person. They almost certainly did every single time, but it's whether the student believed they did. That was the truth.
Yeah.
And so getting the perception and getting the understanding of the people that you're meant to be either teaching or the people that you're meant to be leading is really crucial and critical. I imagine you also probably had a look at that picture and then could at least gauge from the faces of the students and the people in the audience about how engaged they were or how much they were listening or absorbing what you were talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, their faces tell the story.
Yeah, exactly. The second part of the question I wanted to ask you was, because you've done a lot around professional development and getting people to self-reflect. So I have my own answers about what was missing from Leaders PD that was needed, but I wonder what was your perspective? What was missing currently that didn't force those self-reflective questions onto school leaders at the time?
Yeah, well, everybody is not necessarily in tune with the power of self-reflection. And so the analogy that I typically draw is the analogy of athletics. And in athletics, and since we're right here in football season now in the U.S., two teams play a game on a Thursday night a Saturday afternoon during the playoffs, a Sunday, or a Monday night. And they play the game, and then they reconvene perhaps a day later, 2 days later, whenever it is that they come back together. But the last thing they're going to do when they come back together is practice. And the person that doesn't know sports would think the first thing they're going to do when they come back together is practice. But practice is not on the radar when they reconvene, because now we need to see, well, what does the film say? So they look at the film of the game, but they don't watch it the way we would watch it on television. They're looking at the film relative to breaking it down, dissecting it, analyzing it, critiquing it. What worked? What didn't work? If it didn't work, why didn't it work? If it did work, how did it work? And how do we enhance it? If it didn't work, what adjustments do we need to make? What tweaking do we need to do? What do we need to purge anything? Do we need to rethink, reimagine, whatever it is, what it is that we did in terms of our game plan for that game, inclusive of whether or not we won or lost the game. So then they'll have a justification, a basis for practice, because now they've broken down the film. And they'll practice the rest of the week, but they'll keep referring back to the film. So the film never becomes irrelevant throughout the course of the week. And then ultimately is game day, whether it be Thursday, Sunday, or Monday. So they spent a week, yes, practicing, but yes, engaging in film study. So then I go to the principal and I ask the question, how often do you study your film? Right. And it's somewhat of a trick question, because I'm not necessarily assuming that they've got a camera following them around. But yet now in today's times, everybody has a camera in their pocket. So, or close by. So someone could conceivably follow you around a school and put you on camera so that you can see yourself. However, that's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is this, the mirror. And I'm using this symbolically. I'm asking the question, principal, how often, how frequently, and for what duration of time do you simply engage in self-reflection of your day? I don't mean just a passing thought. I don't mean daydreaming. I mean the intentionality of just looking at you from the start of the day. Because I say start in terms of when you start, how far you would rewind, so to speak. Go back to when you woke up in the morning. And what was your attitude as you rose for the day? That matters, because the attitude that you had waking up will probably lay a foundation for who you are as leader throughout the course of the day. Did you wake up fired up and ready to go? Or did you wake up not wanting to go to school, or anything in between? Who were you when you woke up in the morning? And then we go from there. How'd you prepare? What'd you let inside? Here as you got ready. What I mean by that, my staff knew that I don't watch the news in the morning. Now, as a principal, there's certain aspects of the news that are very much relevant for what I do, particularly the local news. I'm an urban guy, so things happen in these urban cities. But I had people around me who knew I didn't watch the news, and if there was something that went on out, particularly locally, they'd make sure that I was informed, because they knew I wasn't watching the news, because I wanted to go in with a clean slate. I wanted to go in just overwhelmingly positive, and I didn't want that negativity of the news to drag me down to any extent. So I said, let me just shy away from it, and I'll pick up on it later in the day, particularly after school hours. I'll catch up. But I didn't want it in me to start my day. So I'm saying, when one reflect on, well, what stimuli did you let in? Did you let through that may have impacted you adversely or advantageously, whatever it is, but what you let in, and then so on. The rest of the day, just reflecting on all of the day, non-judgmentally. Then go back and reflect or assess. Now you want to be judgmental. So reflect on yourself, but now be judgmental by way of being self-assessing. And you self-assess and just be hard on yourself. Like, what are those areas I could have been better? What are those areas that I could have done something differently? What are those areas in terms of who I was as instructional leader, or was I instructional leader? Did I engage students? Did I do the things that matter to me most as a leader of a school? Did I do those things that the school need or requires of me? What is my self-assessment saying of me? And as I say to leaders every day, no need to wait for an evaluator of record to inform you of your effectiveness when your mirror will tell you of your effectiveness in real time, right? You just got to engage in it. So self-reflection, self-assessment, leading to self-adjustment. We got to make a shift.
Yeah. No, I love the analogy of sports. I used to be a PE teacher, and soccer was my sport as opposed to football, but it makes perfect sense when you go back to review the game. It's not only what the result was, but it's how you entered that game. What was your motivation? Did you get enough sleep the night before? Were you warmed up effectively? And then you start to look at the tactics of the game, and if they were effective and if they weren't effective, dependent on the context of that game. And what I also find really, well, two things I also like about that analogy is, being a soccer fan. Let's say Manchester City in the Premier League have been outstanding for the last couple of years, but you'll see they may have the same team, but the way they play has changed every year and will probably change every month, or depending on who they're playing. So what you do and how you behave is going to be different today than it was last school year. It'll probably be different today than it was last week or yesterday, because of the different, outside noise or even inside noise coming into that school. And it's really getting that mindset of, if we want to be consistently excellent or even effective, we need to consistently be judging ourselves, not in a harsh way, but in an honest way, and being, as you were saying before, being comfortable in the discomfort of, looking at yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's go on to you started the book as well with a couple of these questions. And I think it also comes down, what I get out of this is, and you can correct me if I'm reading it differently, but is there proof to show that what I believe I am as the leader, is there proof out there to show that I'm actually being that leader? Because we've all seen in schools the wonderful mission statements that we see as we walk into the school office or the principal's office. But we often see a disconnect between that mission statement and then maybe what goes on across the school and in the classroom. Sometimes we have these wonderful words, but the actions maybe do not reflect those words all the time. So what I get from the questions you're posing here is, am I being true to myself as who I want to be as a leader?
Two things. Let's go to that mission statement that you referenced. The mission statement, when it's got all these nice words, as you said, but you don't see the movement in the school consistent with the mission statement, that's because the mission statement is probably nothing more than a compliance document. It's wall decoration. It's something there to keep the superiors off of my back. They're looking for the mission statement posted throughout the building, and there it is, the mission statement. But I say, because the mission statement is an inherent part of the work I do, and I say that mission statement has to be a living document. It's got to be a document that we have faith in, that we walk by, and I say, therefore, it shouldn't be that lengthy paragraph of blah, 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 blah. The mission statement can be reduced to one potent sentence that captures who you are as a school, what you're about as a school. I always say, that school where I can walk around and ask people the mission and people don't know, whether it be children or adults, then that means that that's a mission-less school. Even though the mission statement's on the wall, the mission of the school should be recited every day, literally every day, at the start of the day. So while students are standing for the flag salute, for example, they can remain standing, and student-led announcements, student lead them through the recitation of the school mission and school vision. And then staff meetings, principals meetings, assemblies, anything where groups come together, we recite the mission. Parents as well. That way, that mission is in this regard, it's known. Now, in terms of practice, that's the accountability piece. And are we walking in the direction of that mission? So I say that in terms of what a mission defines who that school is and what that school is about. And if the mission doesn't exist, or it exists but no one knows it, then we're talking about a missionless school. It's just a school. It just exists, but it's not about anything. Right. So then you tie that to that question on the screen: is who I think I am as the leader of my school consistent with the evidence? So you asked the question, like, how do we know? Right. And there's a few ways, but let me be as brief as I can. Number one is just gauging the people that you're leading. As you gauge them, do you gain a sense that they're on board with you by their behavior? Right, by their actions? Do you gauge that sense that I'm not walking alone, that I've got a whole school around me, in front of me, beside me, behind me? Do I sense that, or am I a lone ranger? I'm walking, but the folks are not with me. Or said differently, they're walking with me, but they're doing it out of compliance. They're not doing it out of just I appreciate, I respect, I believe in this leader and the leadership that accompanies this leader. So as leader, I got to gauge that, and I'm going to gauge it by, once again, the behavior, but also the relationships that I forge with the people that I lead, students and staff. And I will know. Now, some of us will go an extra yard and have the audacity to just survey staff. See, and that's an easy thing to do on the one hand, of surveying staff. The difficulty is one willing to receive what staff has to say, particularly when their responses are anonymous, right? So you put out a survey just to gauge or sense, how do they see me? And you put it out there anonymously so that their identities are protected, and no telling what you may receive, but do you have the audacity to give it to them? I did. Right. And it's the same thing with as a presenter. I'm a presenter, so I get a lot of evaluations from people sitting in those seats. And although I'm not the one requesting them, I read them, and I could choose not to read them, but I do. And as much as sometimes when someone comes at you, very, very differently from how you perceive yourself, there is room to grow from there. You just have to be able to distinguish, is this somebody that just doesn't like you, or is this somebody who really is providing you with constructive criticism? Right. But the bottom line is being able, having the evidence, and the evidence is in part some of what the aforementioned. Yeah.
And I really like how you were talking about, developing the relationships with your staff as well. Yeah. We've mentioned this a couple of times. We did a study a couple of years ago about the characteristics of school leaders who actually did well in that first year of the pandemic when, all hell broke loose. And it was the ones who, as you were saying earlier, could take multiple perspectives on things or asked advice of others, and maybe even, and this is a bit of heresy for educators, asked advice of people outside of education. And so getting different points of view from different sectors. Yeah. But the strongest, or one of the strongest things, was that emotional connection. So we know that the teacher in the classroom, if they have good relationships or strong relationships with their students, they'll be able to teach them better. They know what makes them tick. They know what's going to work. They know why Jose could be quiet today, or whether they should be concerned about that. They know whether Judy is being extra noisy and why they should be concerned about that.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. We have this weird dichotomy in education where we sort of do one thing for the students in the classroom, and we often do something different for the adults across the school. But it's forming those relationships with your staff, with your peers, with your colleagues, that just is really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships matter. I say to folks all the time, you know, the word relationships in education is so cliche. But despite the fact that it's so cliche, it so matters as well. Relationships matter. There's really not a whole lot that we can do productively in education if those relationships are not there. I can strive to be the best instructional leader that I can be, but I got to have a relationship with the people that I'm leading. I can strive to be the best leader of young people that I can be, but I got to have a relationship with those young people. And if those relationships are not there, then I'm probably not going to maximize my potential with either one of them.
Yeah, I know it almost comes down to, I think there's a shift in education we're seeing, which is, you know, if we move away from the mechanics of education, if you see education as only imparting skills and knowledge onto students, onto empty vessels, then yeah, it's all about the delivery, and that's all that matters, providing access to the information. But if you believe that you're developing, you know, as I say, the whole person or the whole child, you're trying to develop them as full, well-rounded people, then understanding that relationship is really key, because you're trying to, much like that coach scenario, you're trying to understand what's really going to make them tick, what's going to make them spark, what's going to get them inspired, what's going to be that little carrot in front of them that's going to make them actually move and jump. And the same thing goes for our staff as well.
Absolutely.
Let's go on to the, I talked about a couple of these things earlier. It's no, you know, we're in the middle of some loud noise, let's put it that way, in our schools and our communities. We're getting policies passed. We're getting things that we probably wouldn't have imagined, like book banning or restricting speech in the classroom or in schools. We've had a blowback against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. So what's your advice to leaders who are surrounded by this noise? I propose the idea of sort of refocusing on some of that self-reflection. But I'm wondering if you have any other advice for school leaders in this noisy time.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise out there. And I'm looking at the words you have highlighted there, you know, equity, mental health, culture wars, AI, you know, and great resignation. It goes on, changing world. There's a lot of noise in terms of what the work I do as a speaker. It translates there too. So a lot of that, which is on that screen in that box, folks ask me. Matter of fact, they don't ask me; they request of me that I not use some of those words, that language, or that content, specifically equity in culture wars. And I don't even use that language, culture wars, but I know what it means. But that word equity, they'll say to me in many states in America, please, Principal Kafele, do not use that word at all in your presentation, right? Do not talk about that in your presentation. Now, I've heard that enough times now to understand it. I used to, and sometimes I'll pretend I don't understand what they're talking about, so that I can get them to elaborate and help them to get to a point where they understand that what they're saying is ridiculous, right? And here's what I mean by that. The word equity. I took that word and I just reduced it to its lowest common denominator. And I said, equity is simply meeting young people where they are, as they are, period. Right. Now, we can get into the whole racial, cultural, LGBT, et cetera, dynamics of it. But at its core, that's not part of the definition. At its core is meeting the children, meeting the scholars, meeting the students, however we're going to describe them, where they are, as they are. So in me being able to bring equity into those schools 100% of the time when they ask me not to, is because in our conversation, I gauged where they are. Like, are they at this far extreme, or are they somewhere in the middle, right? Where are they? So I'll gauge that in the conversation, just asking the right questions. And then as I gauge where they are and gauge how severe this problem is, then we'll get to the issues of the school or the district. Like, okay, well, talk to me about your achievement. Talk to me about your achievement gap or gaps, et cetera. So we'll have all those conversations. And I say, and then I can conclude with them, you need equity. You got some equity issues here. What do you mean, Principal Kafele? Well, your data is saying that you've got groups of students who are doing very well, but other groups are not doing well at all. And equity, meeting young people where they are as they are, with a particular focus on the individuality of each of the students in the building. How could I not talk equity? So there's, usually the response is, oh my God, you're right. Yeah. It's just a matter of you understanding what it is. There's a lot of connotation to equity. But in terms of just looking at it for what it is, in an educational sense definition, I just want to meet them where they are. So if you're coming at this level, they'll meet you way up here. But in that same class, if it's heterogeneous, there may be students who are way down here, right? Or here. I got to meet you there. I can't pretend that all of you are up here. Because if I do, and I should say with that up here, that you're going home to a household where both parents are there, they're making good money, they're guiding you correctly, they're leading you correctly. You're in a very stable environment versus that other youngster who's going home where mom's incarcerated, dad's dead, and great grandmother's raising you, and there's 10 other grandkids in the same house, and and crime and drugs and gangs all over the city. Well, that kid is coming in there with a different experiential background, but the same capacity, has the capacity to achieve at high levels. But as teacher, I got to be able to meet you there. I can't pretend you're up here, that you got that white picket fence you're going home to, and then I'm just going to pretend you're up here. And when you don't perform up here, then I start questioning your intelligence and questioning whether or not you've got certain disabilities that maybe the child study team needs to take a look at. And now this otherwise brilliant youngster finds himself in a special needs self-contained classroom. And now the school to prison pipeline, because I'm mislabeled and misplaced. And we're scratching our heads wondering why we have so many youngsters in that environment. Because I've got teachers that don't understand youngsters, and equity is lacking in those environments. So it's a matter, to go back to the question, it's a matter of being armed with the right information and thereby being able to have or engage in the right conversations so that ultimately I can disarm some of the folks that I work with, whether it be when I was a principal or what I do now, so that and disarm and simultaneously convince them that this which you're fighting against is the reason that you're not where you want to be. It's an ingredient that you need, as opposed to an ingredient that shouldn't be here. But Principal Kafele, what about the community and all that? I say, well, you got to take the initiative, and you're going to have to educate some people, right, as to what is and what isn't. Because as long as the ignorance prevails, then children will always suffer, right? So it's having the people skills, and it's the ability to engage in these tough conversations with whomever the stakeholders are, so that you can get done those things that need to get done.
Yeah. People skills, relationships, being prepared to have those difficult conversations, And so and even those three things are probably taking the role of being an effective leader nowadays away from what we would have imagined 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's not shirking away from those conversations. It's making sure that those conversations about what we're actually needing in this school actually take place, and the people who are maybe not in agreement with that at least understand where the leader is coming from and where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's funny. We had, when you were talking about equity as well, there are so many examples of equity in everything around us. It's like when I get into my car after my daughter drives it, I've got to get into my car and I've got to back that driver's seat up a little bit. Just having that, that's a very banal example of equity, having something that fits you, having shoes that fit you, having personalized learning comes back so we can adjust the learning to suit you, what you need in this situation. And we had Pasi Salberg on one of our conversations about 6 months ago, and he led a lot of the work in Finland over the last couple of decades. Everything they do in Finland, the primary driver is equity. Equity is the fundamental theme behind every intervention that they're doing to provide equity to students in learning. And Finland's done reasonably well in education. We have, I'm going to launch into the questions from the audience now, because we have a couple that have come through already. So if anybody else wants to submit some questions, we're going to scoot over these, which I was going to ask you, but time, as always, runs out on us. So if anyone has questions, let us know. But we have a question from our friends up north in Canada. How have you shifted principals' focus from testing and the school staying funded to self-reflection, which might feel like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic?
Yeah, it's never ever losing sight of why you entered the profession, and in this case made a decision to lead, because no one made you lead. That was a decision, and chances are very good, even though we haven't had a conversation, chances are very good that in your mind you said, if they give me an opportunity to lead, I'm going to take that school to heights that it's never been, or some variation. You didn't go in there saying, I hope they give me an opportunity, but I really don't know if I'm going to be effective or not. I've never met anybody that admitted that anyway. We go in there with the mindset that we're going to take that school to another place. And we do not go in there with the mindset. Like, I don't think anybody entered leadership saying, I'm going to go into leadership and, man, I'm just going to go so hard on these test scores, man. I don't think that's what we do. But then we get in there, and then many of us, we act surprised by what we see when we get there, as if you didn't already know. You just didn't know it from being the leader of it, but you knew that there were issues, right? So I say, therefore, never lose sight of why you walked in. And that goes back to your purpose. It goes back to your why. Never lose sight of why you walked in there. Yes, I had a why. Yes, I had a mission. And yes, I had a vision. And yes, when I walked in there, I walked into some mess, right? Most definitely. I dealt with some stuff when I got into leadership. So I dealt with some stuff and I met it head on. But I also learned how to be strategic in how I meet it, so that ultimately I could still be the one who was on the outside saying, man, I wish I could get in there. Because if they let me in, I'm going to effectuate change. So I'm saying that to give, and this is a short answer, by the way. I'm saying that to say, I'm never going to lose my core reason for entering leadership in the first place. But those test scores, because I don't want to be reckless either, those test scores are real. They matter. So now I had to be strategic about them because, see, I don't believe that a test score defines the intelligence of a youngster. You know, I was on a panel discussion here in Jersey the other night, Sunday night, and one of the presenters on the panel, I was the moderator. One of the presenters was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Mayor Raz Baraka. And he was saying, he reminded us all in the room. He said, in school, we take a test, right? We take a standardized test, and there's some serious ramifications in terms of the results of that test. But those of us who can afford to take a secondary school test, a graduate school test, a law school test, right? If we can afford it, but yet we fail it, we'll take it multiple times. So we'll take it again and again and again and again. And as we keep taking that test, it doesn't judge us, right? It's just we failed it, so we take it again. But with the kids, it judges them on the one shot. So therefore, as the leader of that school, I had to figure out, how do we master this test, even though it doesn't measure precisely whether or not a youngster can read, write, or engage in mathematics? How do we approach this test that we can pass it and then move on and do the real education? So here I am, principal of the lowest performing school in my district. It's 90% free and reduced lunch, meaning poverty. And we're 70% Black and 30% Latino, with a 25% ELL population there that just came into the country. So in my first year, we meet all benchmarks except for one, the ELL population of adequate yearly progress. By my fourth year at that school, not only did we reach 100% proficiency in all subject areas tested, but we also were looked upon as one of America's best high schools. And this is a school that 4 years ago was the lowest performing school in the district. Why? I figured out that testing. And now we could go on and make sure that we're engaging in the real education of young people. See, it's all leadership. That's what it boils down to, leadership. Are you going to put all of your priority in a test, or are you going to figure out how to master that test so that we can really enlighten young people about the world?
Yeah. In a way, it's going back to that coaching analogy. It's like, the wins, the loss, the draws, everything. That's the points scored, the goals scored. Those things are important. You need to pay attention, but you've also got to understand what you're trying to grow and what you're trying to develop. It's it's also amazing how many times I talk to people in education who we all look up to and we all have done well, such as yourself. And it's amazing how many times they say, all right, this is what I'm required to do. Here's the accountability portion.
Yeah.
What I've done is worked out how to address that, but actually start to do what's really important and needed in education. Yeah. You talk to most teachers of the year, that's what they talk about. This was what I had to do. This is how I worked around it. All right, one last question, and then we're going to probably have to sign off. So we talked about self-reflection requiring trust in the leadership. So the question is, what about if you don't feel trust in the leadership of the system of education? So how do you start to gain or change that level of trust? What do you do in that situation?
Just off the top of my head, without giving it a bit of thought, one of the first things I would ask the person, if you don't trust the system of education, what was your motivation for entering it? Right? That's an important question. And because what I'm driving at is this: you don't trust the system of education. Well, then you probably didn't trust it before you got the job. So was your motivation that as I get in there, I'm going to effectuate some kind of change within that system, within my capacity of principal? If so, then you got to operate on that notion, right? But if you decided, because see, for me, I didn't trust it. I didn't agree with it. Particularly, I'm an urban guy. I'm an African American, right? All the students are African American. African Americans are traditionally on the wrong side of the achievement gap, So I went in not trusting it, but my mindset said I'm going in to effectuate change. So in other words, I'm going in to prove to the system, the students, the teachers, the parents, the state, the world, America, the world, that despite the system, we're going to navigate this thing and we're going to come out successfully. Right. So therefore, I'm going to challenge the system. But I knew going in, this system in its current form was not productive for Black and brown children. I mean, the data speaks for itself. Right. So I'm going in with the mindset that I'm going to effectuate change. And I'm not even talking about the system. I'm talking about within a school as a principal. Right. I'm not going to buck the system. I'm not going to necessarily position myself where I got everybody coming against me, because I'm going to move strategically when I do it. But make no mistake about it, I'm not going to be absorbed by it. I'm not going to become a part of it. I'm going to be where I'll work within it, but I'm going to be doing some things that are radically different from what the system may require of me. And, you know, like the young people said, I keep receipts. So I got the receipts to say that I was able to do that.
I read in one of your bios that you don't like being called a motivational speaker. Mm. You prefer to be called a discomfort speaker, or a speaker that makes people uncomfortable. But I don't know. I still think you're motivational.
Or just an educator. Because
there you go. I just think the words you come out with, just I'm sure the rest of our audience believes the same thing as well.
I mean, I want to be inspiring. I just don't want the title.
Wonderful. All right, we're going to move on. We're running sort of out of time. So a message from our sponsors, which happens to be a message from you, Baruti. So give me a 1 minute sound off of Baruti Kafele and where people can go for more information.
Yeah, you can go right to my website that you see on the screen, principalkafele.com, and all my information is there. And just the one thing I want to tell you about, I'm on live every Saturday morning, sitting right here or in another location if I'm on the road speaking. And it's this Saturday will be week number 179 of my AP and New Principles Academy. You can go to the website, principalkafele.com, and it'll tell you where you can watch it from. Nothing to sign up for, nothing to register for, no Zoom. We're on Facebook Live, Twitter Live, YouTube Live, and LinkedIn Live. But most of those platforms will be Principal Kafele, except for YouTube. It's AP and New Principles Academy. And you can go to that channel and watch all the previous 178 sessions where we're just giving information, myself and my guest, about how to be a most effective assistant principal, a most effective new principal, and quite frankly, a most effective veteran principal. So that's and then my books are there. I'm not going to get into all those titles, but they're all on the website. But the main thing is I want you to be a part of what we call my family, the family of AP and New Principal Academy viewers every Saturday morning, 10:55 Eastern time. We go for about 90 minutes to 2 hours. So this is not something short. We got a lot to share with helping the world become that much more effective within their leadership.
Fantastic. Where do you get the energy from?
I'm living my passion. So if it wasn't my passion, and when your passion and your purpose align and your dream, then you're in a good space in life. Your passion, your purpose, your dream, when they all align, life couldn't be better. And that's where I am. So therefore, it's not really using energy, because it's me just having the opportunity to live my life on my terms.
Fantastic. And obviously, the other sponsor of this is us. So BTS Spark. So there's a quick little preview of the work that we do. We educational leadership development for school leaders, for emerging leaders, for assistant principals, new principals. Where we focus is not so much on the instructional leadership, it's more that human transformational side of leadership, how you can be the best leader you can be, how you can be a more effective leader, and many of the things we talked about today around difficult conversations, leading in uncertainty, listening, developing empathy, your own personal resilience and confidence, your own leadership personality as well. We touch on all of those things. And we base it, as you probably saw at the very start of the webinar, on our 33 mindsets, which fall into those 4 buckets of relate, be, think, and inspire. I want to thank Baruti. That was a fantastic conversation. We're going to have this up on our YouTube site probably by tomorrow, but we're going to email everybody that registered, no matter where you are in the world. We do have every other webinar that we've done with, as I mentioned, Parsi Solberg, Michelle Borba, Deb Delisle. Who else did we have? John Hattie, Michael Pullen. The whole range of people are up there. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well.
John, I'm going to sign off because I got that other interview. I got to go.
Sounds fantastic.
Appreciate it. Thank everybody out there.
Thank you, Baruti.
Thank you.